question is, what probability would you put on the fact that China, lives behind walls, wants to stay behind walls, and does not want to be expansionist in a way that could really harm democracies in the rest of the world and through Southeast Asia?
Well, what is the essence of democracy? If we go back to the Greek origin of that word, it is governance, for, by, of the people. If you compare China, the US, with India, they've not done badly. You don't judge a society by how thick its billionaire class is or how well they live. You judge a society by the condition of its bottom 10%. And I would say that the bottom 10% of people living in China fare better than the bottom 10% of any other major country on earth. So is that democracy? Is that not democracy?
大家好，今天这期视频给大家带来的是一场火药味十足的中美制度与发展之争。在这场访谈节目中，主持人亚当·迪克森围绕中国的治理模式、所谓强后社会、民主以及人工智能发展等敏感话题接连发问。而面对这些带着明显西方视角的问题，演讲人杨荣文并没有顺着他的逻辑往下走，反而从中国的发展现实一层层把问题掰开来谈。有人认为中国把自己关在墙后，缺乏西方式的开放与民主，因此很难真正实现长远发展。可杨荣文却提出了一个相当扎心的问题：如果一个社会最终要看的是普通人的生活、国家的发展效率以及能不能持续解决现实问题，那么只盯着制度标签，真的就够了吗？更有意思的是，当话题转向中美竞争，杨荣文甚至直言，美国自身的监管体系同样层层设限，而中国在很多领域反而拥有更大的调整空间。从中美到欧洲、印度、中东未来的发展方向，这场对话越聊越大。那么，所谓墙究竟困住了中国，还是某些人看中国的方式？当中国的发展道路越来越难以用西方模板解释时，真正需要重新审视的到底又是谁？接下来，让我们一起看看这场有些打脸的现场交锋。
But bringing it back to where we are today, so you have on one hand China, on the other you have the United States. Now, me as an American, I'm have a bias to be pro-American by default. But also, I have lots of respect for China, and I was recently there in China a month ago. And when I'm in China, when I'm in the United States, I'm not worried. I see two relatively dynamic societies that have ambition, have a sense of purpose, notwithstanding in the United States the politics, but that's a figure of democratic politics everywhere, but a sense of purpose and direction, and in particularly in the current state, right? I mean, if you look, talking about energy, I mean, the U.S. is an oil and gas superpower, and that's driving the AI revolution. It's also a continental economy. It could, it won't be, I don't think, like China in the terms of a kind of a closed economy, but it could be. China, as you mentioned, has always had this 1,000-year history of having borders, having the civilization, as you mentioned, the walls, the material walls, but also the digital walls that are put up. And if you like, the CCP is just another dynasty in the long-running history of China. But where does that leave everyone else? Where does it leave Europe? Where does it leave the likes of Singapore? I mean, Singapore, I think, is adaptable in its size, but it's still small. Where does it leave the Middle East, which we've seen is now fracturing in a way that was not so 6 months ago? Where does it leave the other large country in the world, India, who kind of navigates, but also is growing? Where does it leave these other, and I don't want to use the term middle powers, where does it leave everyone else? Because you see some pockets of growth and innovation here in Europe, but there's a general malaise, unfortunately, and there's a general lack of purpose and direction. How do you see the rest sitting in this, where China and the US will be fine? Where is everyone else?
I'm not sure about the US. When the US celebrated its bicentennial, It was just after I left Cambridge. And I remember the BBC series by Alistair Cook, America, which was reduced into a beautiful volume, which I bought at a considerable price for me at that time, but which I enjoyed greatly. This year is the 250th anniversary, and it's not celebrated in the same way as it was at the bicentennial. So if you take a timeline, there is a relative decline. And you ask yourself, where would the US be for a tricentennial? I don't know. No one knows. So there is this internal struggle in the US. Strategic retreat is painful. Elon Musk, for whom there's no problem which cannot be solved, he hated Doge, and he failed miserably. He was politically naive. Politics is difficult. Politics in the US today is difficult. The US has energy aplenty, but Elon Musk said to build data centers, the approvals that you have to get from different levels is awesomely difficult. You know, China today produces more power than the US and the EU combined. And the graph is diverging. Near where my mother came from, along the Taiwan Straits, which is a wind tunnel, they are building windmills taller than the tallest building in Singapore, where the energy unit cost is half that of the Chinese average, which is already among the lowest in the world. What are they thinking of? Generating hydrogen and processing data from Southeast Asia through fiber optical cables. They're thinking like that. And they can do it because the regulations are permissive. The US has a visible hand which has turned rigid. It's very difficult to do things requiring that hand to move. China, in contrast, in terms of its national development, is still flexible. It will not be forever. Europe, I think, is in trouble because the energy costs in Europe are horrendously expensive. And with such high energy costs, the future of AI in Europe cannot be bright. And a lot of it is self-inflicted. I mean, to right this position, Europe will have to review its policy on Russia, its policy on the Middle East, its policy on North Africa, from all which sources there's energy in abundance just next door. But it's denying itself of all these sources of energy and being cajoled into buying American energy instead. Why is this happening in Europe? Because the politics in Europe have become dysfunctional. So again, it is Adam Smith's first book which provides the insight, not the second book. If you ask me about India, India is different from China. It's got a different history, different social structure. It's heterogeneous, but it's also determined to be an AI power. It's not well endowed in energy naturally, but it's sourcing the cheapest energy available. And it's going to solar in a very big way. I think India, with its population and its brain power, will eventually be an AI power too. Brazil, maybe, because they have the girth and the people. Africa is a different story. Africa is in an earlier phase, which can benefit from the development of other countries. So, we'll see. We don't know. This is, I mean, history is a history of institutional and political change. So we mustn't think that there's any set of rules or any institutional structure which is perfect for all times. It may work for a while, then it ages, and it's hard to rebuild. Yeah. Then you're stuck. The hand ages.
I like what you said about China, because there is the perception that America is free and liberal in many ways, but actually it's constrained in many ways by regulation. And people forget, for all the talk of how top-down China is, there's actually quite a bit of freedom and liberalism that allows people to, and entrepreneurs to innovate and to move in a direction. Of course, there's state involvement, but there's state involvement everywhere. And I think that's important, not to be naive about these different parts of the world. Now, we have room for a question or two, not a short lecture, a question for George. I see hands going up. I'm going to go first to David, Isan, and then we'll get Ayman.
Thank you for a brilliant lecture. And I would like to take away your view that, China, because of homogeneity, really doesn't have an expansionist strategy or interest. But if you care about democracies versus autocracies, you might want an insurance policy just in case you're wrong about that. But the question is, what probability would you put on the fact that China, lives behind walls, wants to stay behind walls, and does not want to be expansionist in a way that could really harm democracies in the rest of the world and through Southeast Asia?
Well, what is the essence of democracy? If we go back to the Greek origin of that word, it is governance, for, by, of the people. If you compare China, the US, with India, they're not done badly. You don't judge a society by how thick its billionaire class is or how well they live. You judge a society by the condition of its bottom 10%. And I would say that the bottom 10% of people living in China fare better than the bottom 10% of any other major country on earth. So is that democracy? Is that not democracy? I think something worth discussing.
Question for Isan. The microphone has disappeared. Oh, there's Matt. Well, just for the recording, please. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, George. You did pick up a lot on how AI has to be in an area that has energy, and the support of energy would make a prosperous AI. What do you think of what's happening in the Gulf now with the states and the sovereign funds investing very heavily in the infrastructure of AI, and how that's going to kind of put a different diversification for those areas?
Well, power in the Middle East is heavily concentrated in a few hands, both political and financial power. And to develop technology, we import large numbers of foreigners. And the result is non-organic development. So if you look at, say, Abu Dhabi, Dubai, when the foreigners leave, you're in trouble. And you need them to come back. In the end, what you need in the Islamic world is development from within, organic development. And Muslims have to find their own way to the future. AI has values embedded into the weights. You can't have AI in the Middle East which responds to a question, print me different pictures and cartoons of the Prophet. Just as there are certain questions you can't answer, ask of AI in America or of AI in China. So in the end, the Islamic world, using paper from China and using AI now from outside, will have to evolve its own pathway, its own enlightenment into the future, for which we have to look into the three big population centers, which is Egypt, Turkey, and Iran. And three different dramas are now ongoing.
So I'm going to take two more questions. So first, Ayman. So behind you, Ayman, there's a microphone. And then I'll take one more after that.
Hello, Ayman Butler from the Adam Smith Institute.
What institute?
Adam Smith Institute.
Oh, okay.
AI,
Glasgow.
They're not a competitor.
Thank you. AI, not at all. AI and China. You mentioned paper, how it made new ideas possible. The Enlightenment obviously made new ideas possible. And broke down traditional relationships of the elites and of governments and the church. AI must do the same thing, breaking down elites. But how is China going to resist, to preserve its homogeneity? How is it going to resist the liberation which AI would give to its own people?
Fantastic question.
I don't know. they themselves don't know. But they know it's going to be a huge challenge. And if I go into a small detail, it's not a small detail, it's a very important point, but it's not reported at all in the Western media. China is controlled by the Communist Party, which has a monopoly of political power. The Chinese Communist Party exercises authority north, south, east, and west. And there's major departments, like the Central Military Commission, which controls the PLA. It's got the Organization Department, which controls talent. It's got the Communication Department, which controls all media, including the internet, museums, cinema halls. It's got the International Relations. And recently, they established, 3 years ago, a new department called the Social Works Department. So even though social affairs are the prerogative of ministries and the State Council, the Communist Party, sensing that new technologies will create new tensions in society, have decided to give it political attention. And it's quite interesting. I was in my own ancestral village recently, and every 5th lunar month, they have the dragon boat race. And this time, they make sure that all the previous party secretaries turn up, because they said, to effect change, you must bring the people from before along, because otherwise they will resist change. And every time there are social problems, they are hypersensitive. Hypersensitive. I know this personally because I'm trying to take over my grandfather's house, and it's a complicated political exercise. Why? Because the consent of the people living there must be sought. It may appear authoritarian, but at the grassroots, China is not an authoritarian society. There's great sensitivity to social needs and social concerns. They do not know what the future will be, but they know that what they're embarking on will turn everything upside down. There was an equivalence when the internet was opened up in China. I was at that time the Minister for Information regulating the internet in Singapore. They sent a high-level delegation of many ministers to Singapore as my guests. For 1 week, they did nothing else but work, morning, afternoon, evening. They didn't go shopping, they didn't go sightseeing. By the end, they left. They knew aspects of Singapore that I did not know or that I did not care to know. And I was mystified. I said, why did they do that? 3 months later, they issued their paper on the internet. I did tell them that you can always control the portals. You can always control the major sites. Without that policy change in China, you won't have Huawei, you won't have Alibaba, you won't have Baidu. So they are taking the same experimental approach, deciding how much should be the visible hand and how much should be the invisible hand in promoting the growth, the healthy growth of this sector.
I said I would take another question, but unfortunately I have to keep the time, otherwise I'll get in trouble. I could keep asking George questions. I think it was a fascinating opening to our conference and to our next panel, which continues the theme of geoeconomic competition and the new wealth of nations. So if we could just give George a nice warm applause. Thank you. Thank you so much. Excellent. Thank you.
回看整场访谈，真正值得关注的或许已经不只是中国和美国谁的发展模式更好，而是当全球格局发生变化后，各个国家还能不能找到适合自己的道路。从美国的能源与监管困局，到欧洲高昂的能源成本，再到印度、中东和非洲寻找新的增长空间，今天的世界显然已经不是只有一种发展答案。而中国最大的变化，也许正是在于它没有完全照搬西方模式，而是在发展过程中不断调整，在政府调控与市场活力之间寻找新的平衡。当然，这条路并不意味着没有问题，任何制度都会面临新的挑战，也都需要随着时代变化不断调整。所以，与其争论中国是不是活在墙后，不如换个角度思考，这堵墙究竟限制了中国，还是让中国走出了一条不同于西方的发展道路？当各国都在寻找自己的发展方向，真正重要的或许不是谁的制度标签更漂亮，而是谁能更有效地解决自己的问题。你认为评价一个国家到底应该更看重制度，还是普通人的生活与发展成果？欢迎在评论区留下你的看法。